go. Quick few things just to get us set up. If you have your own insights, if you have your own ideas, if you've seen different things work for yourself, do share it as well. No bullshit, be honest. So if you think that I'm giving some bad advice, feel free to call me out on that as well. Be respectful. So everyone here, we are trying to create a welcoming environment. So the idea is we try not to discriminate against race, gender, ethnicity, anything like that. So yeah, I hope we all have some fun. A few things. If you're not familiar with Zoom, there is a chat function that you can actually find if you go under the More section, or you can just press Alt-H if you're on PC, and that will bring up the chat. If you're typing in the chat box, make sure you're typing to everyone so we can all see it. Or if you want to send me a private message, you can click on the Everyone button to select my name and send me a private message as well. And I think that is it for housekeeping. Other basic things I would definitely recommend: turn off any extra tabs you have open, other distractions, things like that. So just the basic stuff. So let us get started. Give me a quick second. Let me just set up my notes. All right. So if you've been for some of my sessions, I like to actually open with introductions. So if anyone wants to, feel free to come off mute or feel free to type in the chat box, 30 seconds, introduce yourself, and anything interesting that you want to share. So if you have any interesting workshops coming up, any events, if you've seen an interesting course, you heard any interesting news that you want to share with the group, feel free to share that as well. If you're looking for a job, if you're looking to hire someone, basically anything. And if you don't want to come off mute, you can type in the chat box. I can read it out as well. I can make a quick announcement. I know Red Academy just shut down, but their students are looking for projects. So if you are looking for graphic designers, UX, UI designers, developers, then they probably have a lot of students that can pick up some work. So if you're looking for that type of talent, you can let me know and I can connect you with the right people there. If anyone is an entrepreneur who's running a business, I also read today that the government just changed their regulations. Instead of looking at the previous year's month of revenue and comparing it to this month's worth of revenue, you can actually compare January and February this year to March. So if you're making less in March than you were in January or February, you qualify for the wage subsidy program. Anyone? Anything to share? Right, if not, I am moving on. If I move along too quickly, again, just feel free to type in the chat box and I will go back and read the message as well. So quickly, just to introduce myself. Oh, sorry, Dean Newman, 30 years in e-software industry, CEO for tech startup, 7 years now offering engineering management on a contract consulting basis to help startups get off the right foot. Thanks for the intro, Dean. Great. Samin, we are having an event on people management next Thursday, Q&A. So that's the link. The topic is Spicy Hotline. I want to define and solve my team's real problems, not symptoms. Cool. We're looking for students in areas of organizational behavior and marketing. Sounds interesting. Great. I'm going to do my intro, and then I'm going to continue reading if you guys type out in the chat box. So a bit about myself. My name is Chin. I actually come from a rich background in consulting. I've actually spent the last 5 years working at Spring, which is a local startup incubator here in Vancouver. Spring focuses on social ventures, so we work with businesses that are not only making money, but also making the world a better place in the process. So these are interesting companies like East Van Roasters, where they actually make chocolate and they run a coffee shop, but they also hire women from the downtown east side. I work with a lot of interesting entrepreneurs all the way from the idea stage through to the stage where they're launched and starting to raise some money from investors as well. So the fun part is I think a lot of these ideation stuff is going to come from the angle of ideation for a startup, coming up with new ideas for companies. It actually does also apply if you're thinking about innovating within your own organization as well. So if you're working in a company right now and you're trying to come up with new ideas to actually spin off a product or maybe solve a problem in a different way, some of it might apply to you as well. Christine Surka. Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Surka, consultant and program manager. Happy to connect and looking for remote work. Experience 20 years at IBM. Oh, thank you, Christine. More about myself. So right now I'm running this venture called Classy Now. And what Classy Now does is we provide soft skill training and development for entrepreneurs and career changes. So that is basically it in a nutshell. All of these workshops that I'm running right now are free workshops. So you are definitely free to attend. But I do ask that if you find that it is of value of you, that you give me a small donation. I am also doing this as my full-time job right now. I'm supporting a family, so I do appreciate any donations that you can give as well. So without further ado, maybe I can jump into it. Quickly, Jonathan. My name is Jonathan. I'm looking to learn more about working in the social impact space. I recommend a phone call this month to have a casual chat. For sure. Jonathan, definitely feel free to send me a message. I come from the social impact background, so happy to chat about that as well. Great. So today's session, what we are going to try to do is we're going to try to come up with different ways to come up with new ideas. We are going to talk a bit more about how we can validate and vet those ideas to determine which is the best idea to go with. And we will talk about different methods for increasing creativity as well. I do want to make a quick disclaimer that there's no guarantee that coming out of this session that you will have that big aha moment and that amazing idea that will change the world. But hopefully this will get you started and get your creative juices flowing. Weave and Vasallo, an international business student who will be having her co-op next week. I'm a video editor and I also do entry-level graphic designs. For the information, that's a contact info, right? I'm gonna read that out. Great, I'm gonna get started. Feel free to continue putting your intros there, but I actually will stop reading the intros at the moment just to have a bit more continuity with the presentation. Great, so as we get started, I'm curious to hear from the crowd. We have about 50 people in the room right now. How many of you have an idea that you want to start as a business? You can use the raise hand function, I think. Actually, I don't even know how to raise hand, but you can just quickly type in the chat. How many of you are looking for an idea? Oh, so David, Carmen have an idea, I'm assuming. Looking for an idea. Definitely great. Yes. So the one challenge that I see is commonly, especially with entrepreneurs, a lot of us tend to have a lot of ideas. And the challenge is actually figuring out what is the best idea, which one has the best potential, the least amount of risk. And it's also basically what idea really appeals to our personal values and our interests. So what I'm going to go through today will kind of address some of those. Great, thank you all for sharing. So let's quickly review different types of ideas. I want to kind of talk about some of these just to give you an insight around how innovation works. I think some of us might have a preconception around a limited view of what innovation looks like. So I just want to kind of expose different types of ideas so that we can see that we don't necessarily have to reinvent the wheel all the time. So of course, the key thing is when we think about ideas, different people have different perspectives. So sometimes it's just one simple thing, but two different people looking at the same thing might actually come up with different ideas. So perspective is a big importance, and that's why diversity is such a big thing. When we look at teams, they talk about the nice thing is what we call cognitive diversity. So good teams actually try to find other team members that are cognitively different from them. And the main way to do that is because, the main reason they do that is because when you have cognitive diversity, you have different perspectives, and then you can come up with different ideas. But the thing is, that also will actually positively impact your D&I metrics. So if you're thinking like, some companies, they talk about having more women in their team, or people from different global backgrounds or ethnic backgrounds, all of that contributes towards cognitive diversity as well. So the thing I like to encourage a lot of managers is actually focus more on cognitive diversity, and D&I will naturally come, instead of focusing on recruiting just to get that gender balance or just to get that sort of racial diversity in the workforce. Focus more on recruiting based on cognitive diversity, and all of that will follow. So brand new ideas, of course, sometimes you might get that spark of innovation where sometimes you come up with something that is entirely unthought of. iTunes is one great example of that. Selfie stick, I don't know, possibly one of those. Existing ideas do it better. So sometimes ideas don't have to be entirely brand new. I'm sure we can all agree that Facebook was pretty much a replication of MySpace. They only did it much better. So sometimes what happens is when we think about ideas, you don't necessarily have to be the first in the market. A lot of entrepreneurs think that, oh, if I have an idea, I have to have first mover advantage. I have to be the first company in this space. No one else has to be doing it. And that isn't necessarily right. It might sometimes be better to be the second and be better than the first, instead of being the first and then have someone come in and learn from your mistakes and take advantage of your customers that have already been educated as well. It could even be existing ideas, but doing it differently instead of doing it better. So Tinder is one obvious example. So Match.com, there are a lot of dating websites out there that help you match. But previously, before Tinder existed, matching was primarily based on looking at your profile, looking at your interests, trying to do keyword matching, things like that. So Tinder is more visual, the swiping thing. Different market. So sometimes we see the exact same idea just being applied to different markets. Foodie is one great local example. If you're not familiar with them, they're a Vancouver-based company. And what they do is they basically do food delivery, but for corporations. So they actually have a very interesting story, and I'll go into that in a bit. But basically, in a nutshell, they started in the consumer market. They actually started as consumer food delivery as well. And they saw that the consumer market was actually not very loyal, and they were undercutting costs as much as possible. So they found that they could actually pivot towards the business market, and they're actually doing very well right now. Of course, it could also be old ideas just revisited, because maybe the timing is not right. So if you think that Tesla is the first electric car, you're probably wrong. The first electric car was actually a long, long time ago in the 1800s, when Thomas Edison actually created the Bailey Roadster, which is actually an electric motorized vehicle. So kind of cool. So let's quickly talk about coming up with ideas. When it comes to coming up with ideas, some of you have seen this, and if you were in my last talk, you actually also were exposed to it. But in Simon Sinek's video, he talks a bit about why Apple is different. So if you think about how Apple is positioned in the market, they have the same access to the talent in the workforce. They have the same access to designers, consultants, media agencies, and they're basically building the same types of products, right? They have the iPods, the iPads. They're basically creating MP3 players, they're creating laptops, all the same stuff. But what makes them so innovative, so different? And the core behind that is, it's really about the mission, about their why. So Simon Sinek talks about the why in his talk. You can look it up. It's a TED talk called How Great Leaders Inspire People, or some people commonly refer to the TED talk as Start with the Why. So if you look at this circle that he's created, a lot of companies, they know what they're doing, right? They know what products or services they're creating. Some of them even know how they're different from the competitors, but not many of them actually know why they're actually doing what they're doing. And communicating from the inside out, from the why, actually makes a big, big difference. So he talks about how Apple, if they were to position themselves, they said, hey, we make computers and they're beautifully designed, user-friendly, do you want to buy one? It doesn't seem as appealing to you, but when you actually have the why and you communicate from the why, then it actually rallies people around that vision a lot more strongly. So they talk about, hey, everything we do, we try to challenge the status quo. We try to do things differently. And how we do that is by creating beautifully designed, user-friendly products. And we happen to make a computer. Do you want to buy one, right? So that's kind of the positioning. And not only positioning to attract your clients and customers, but positioning in terms of where the ideas come from as well. Because once you know where your anchor point is, where you're grounded on in terms of your vision, then that's kind of the center point for where ideas are stemming from. And ideas are really aligning themselves to that vision. So you have to make sure that, if the idea for Apple is challenging the status quo and doing things differently, then all the ideas have to be teamed around that. Make sense? So quick exercise, I want some of you to just do some reflection. I'm not going to take too much time on this. I want you to just quickly reflect on what are you passionate about, what do you love to do, what do you believe. So are there certain times in work or in your personal life, things that you really, really enjoy? Are there certain things that you believe about society, about the way things are done that are not done correctly? Are there certain problems out there that you feel really irritated by? Are there certain things that you feel like it's important to solve? Maybe now, especially in this moment where we're seeing a lot of people becoming unemployed. Or are there other things that you just see on a day-to-day basis that you feel like, hey, maybe I could solve that problem? So maybe I'll give you about 2 minutes to just kind of reflect on this. If you've done some of this reflection before, then just go through this exercise again. Just take some time, think about what are some problems that you see that you can try to come up with solutions for. One more minute. Great. Let's move on. So part 2 of the exercise is just quickly reflect, what are you good at? What are you not good at? What do you enjoy? What do you actually not enjoy? I like looking at the negatives as well, because I think sometimes it's easier for us to know what we actually don't like to do, what we don't enjoy, what we're not good at. What we enjoy, sometimes it's so broad and there's so many things as well. So I want you to just quickly look at some, on a high level, what are just some things that you are good at skill-wise, both professionally, but also if you look at soft skills as well. So you might say, I'm good at teaching people, or I'm good at public speaking. Same with what do you enjoy and what you don't enjoy as well. So you can write down personal passions, hobbies, things like that as well, not only professional. 30 seconds more. All right. So the reason why I like to start with the passion piece is one of the biggest questions that I typically get from a lot of entrepreneurs is, when do I know if my idea is actually a bad idea and if I should actually discontinue and stop it? Or when do I know if maybe if I just need to try a little bit more and that's that diamond wall right behind the wall. So the typical answer and what I normally see with a lot of entrepreneurs is good entrepreneurs are usually they have this term called grit, and grit is basically perseverance, right? Do you actually have that mindset where you don't give up easily? But the challenge is it's very easy to confuse grit with stubbornness. So the biggest difference is the ones that are very successful, the successful entrepreneurs that I see, they don't easily confuse grit with stubbornness. And how I see them doing it is they're normally very persistent in terms of working towards their vision, but they're actually very flexible when it comes to manifestation of their solution. So when we talk about business, there's this term called pivots, and pivot basically means when you actually make a change in the business, be it maybe you go after a different customer, or maybe you change the type of solution that you're creating, or it might be even as simple as changing the pricing, or maybe even changing the channels which you find your customers. So when you look at entrepreneurs that don't give up quickly, normally the ones that have good perseverance, they have this clear North Star. So they have a clear vision and mission. And what happens is when they come against a specific challenge, they don't see it as a roadblock where they just have to give up, or maybe it's not working. They actually find different ways around it. And at the end of the day, they're still going towards the same North Star. They're just finding different detours towards that vision or mission. That's why I always think it's very, very important to really define and start with the why before you even go into ideation. So start with thinking about what you're really passionate about, and from there ensure that the ideas that come up from it align with your vision and align with your values as well. So let's quickly talk about some pivots. So when companies make pivots, usually good pivots are grounded in, like I mentioned, grounded in your mission or vision. They're also either grounded in things that you learn. So you want to make sure that when you're pivoting, when you're changing something about the business, you're not just randomly trying stuff. You're not doing what we call throwing shit on the wall and seeing what sticks, right? You're not going from drones to self-driving cars to VR, AR, or AI, or anything like that. So you're not trying random stuff. You're doing stuff that is very specific. So maybe you might say, okay, I'm really passionate about education. So I'm going to try and start an online course. And then you find, oh, actually, maybe the online course doesn't seem to work very well. Maybe I'm going to try and create like some sort of membership platform or program. Or maybe that's not working very well. Maybe I'm going to try and create an app or something like that. So the manifestation is different, but you're still trying to solve for the same problem. So your vision is the same. You're doing it based on things that you have learned as well. So if you have learned something, let's say, for example, you might actually try on Facebook and you find, oh, you know what? We can't target on Facebook because the audience is actually not aligned with our customer persona. So maybe your persona is actually professionals, then maybe it's better to go after LinkedIn. So you're doing your pivots based on things that you've learned. And then the third thing is most pivots, not all, but most pivots typically ground themselves in either the customer or either the problem. So what I mean by that is the customer pivot is when they say, okay, maybe we find that we are building a solution for seniors, and seniors actually say they don't have this problem, but they actually have another problem. Then in that case, then they're still solving for seniors, but they're deciding, okay, we'll solve a different problem for the same customer. Then on the flip side, it could be maybe you actually find that, oh, your solution actually works really, really well, but seniors don't care about it, but actually maybe stay-at-home moms care about it. Then they would pivot the customer. They would still solve the same problem, but they would go after a different customer. Make sense? There are other types of pivots out there as well, but I'd say some of those pivots are usually more shot in the dark, more luck instead of design by design. So I think Slack is one good example of that. This is what they call a feature pivot. So if you know the story of Slack, I'll quickly go into that. Stuart Butterfield. He basically created an MMORPG, a game, and he found that the game was not doing very well. And one of the features that he built for his team to communicate while they were designing the game was Slack, and that actually was spun out to become Slack as a company. But that's a bit more hit and miss. So ideation, let's get back on topic. Quickly, to get started, if we are struggling with ideation, the obvious point is to really start by solving your own problem. So like I mentioned in Slack's case, they were actually creating a communication platform to help their teams communicate better while they were working on the game. So that was their own personal problem. Back in the days when communication was pre-Slack, they were doing it through email, or they were doing it through, I don't know if you remember, but basically it was like ICQ. So it was, you could send messages, but people could only see it when they come back online again. So it wasn't kind of a live situation. Solving someone else's problem. So you can also look at other problems that other people are facing that you feel passionate about. So this is Nico Christophe. He is one of the alumni from Spring. And what he does is he's actually a doctor. And when he was in Uganda, he was working with some of the hospitals. He found out that actually one of the biggest problems is a lot of women who are delivering children who are actually bleeding out and dying because of that. So that was actually because they were not getting the right medication they needed to get their blood to clot. And it wasn't because there wasn't that medication around. Usually in most cases, they actually saw that maybe this hospital didn't have it, but another hospital just 3 kilometers down the road has it. But then the challenge is, so number one is we don't have the stock in our hospital. Number two is we don't have the database to actually look at which hospitals have the right stock. And what would happen is the hospital will actually have to send out people on motorcycles that would go from different hospital to hospital just to find which hospital had the right supplies. And sometimes it was very ineffective because maybe they would go 5 kilometers to the next town, find out that that hospital doesn't have it as well, but they didn't know that just a few blocks down the road, there's a pharmacy that has it. So he's creating this blockchain environment to help hospitals, pharmacies, and the government actually track where all the medication is. So, in that case, solving someone else's problem. Solving problems of tomorrow. So I think Elon is a great example of that. Many of his ideas all stem from that. So when he's thinking about Tesla, Solar City, these are all thinking about power consumption problems of the future. If you're thinking about problems to solve today that are problems of tomorrow, one big one that you can probably look at is unemployment is going through the roof right now with this COVID situation. So I feel like we are already in a recession. So I would definitely say that it will definitely push us into a recession in the formal terms, which is having 2 quarters consecutively of lower GDP than previous. So if you're thinking, what can I do? Look at all the people who are unemployed, think about what you can do for them. How can you solve their problem of getting food on the table? There are many different ideas that I'm seeing sprouting out from this right now. What's interesting is unicorns or startups actually really favor the recession. If you look at the last recession, a lot of amazing startups actually came out from the recession. So look at what problems are coming up. Some interesting ones that I'm seeing now is in the States, children, they depend on schools for their lunches, for their foods. So there are a lot of different companies that are doing logistics, doing food delivery, food prep, things like that are coming up. So think about different ideas to solve for different people who are being impacted, not only by the work from home situation, because I think working from home like that is temporary, but the unemployment situation, that is very real, and that's going to continue on into the future as well. So what future problems could you solve? Food is another big one. As you can see, population of the earth is continuing to grow. I think it was, what was the number? Was it 20 million or something around in the next 20 years or so? I don't remember. Anyways, the idea is our current agricultural solutions do not solve and produce enough for us to actually meet the growing population in the future. So how can we think about different ways to grow more sustainable food for the growing population? Clean water is another big problem of tomorrow as well. So just think about what's happening in the future instead of focusing on the now. Helping people save money, that's another common way. This is a great one. So Arbutus Medical, also a Spring alumni, Lawrence, when he went to, I believe, Nigeria, he was actually seeing that doctors were actually doing that. They were actually using power tools, hand drills, to actually do bone operations because they couldn't get access to clean, sterilized drills. And those clean sterilized drills were actually going on the market for I think $20,000-$30,000. And what they did is they actually created a sterilized drill cover. So it's a cover, simple fabric cover that goes over these type of power tools that allows them to use these tools, but also maintain that clean and sterilized environment. And it reduces cost a lot. So they don't actually have to get a full customized tool itself. They can just simply get the cover itself. Making life easier. So obvious one is MailChimp, helping people send more emails more quickly to more people. Another big idea that I've had in the back of my mind, if anyone wants to take this idea and run with it, is one of the common problems that I have when I send out my newsletters is I find that, and a lot of companies do this as well, typically they segment their newsletters. So they have different people, like they might send a different newsletter to investors versus to customers versus to partners. But what might happen is they might want the bulk of the newsletter to look the same, but maybe they just want to customize and change one portion of the newsletter. And now the only way to do that with existing tools is that you duplicate the newsletter and then you change the block. So one idea is to edit, have one single newsletter that you can edit, and then just change the block based on who you're sending it to. So that's one random idea if you want to take that and run with it. So maybe let's go through some exercises. What are some of your own personal problems, be it at school, at work, or if you're not at work, things in the household as well. If you have kids, if you have a family, what are some frustrations that you see? So I'll give you guys maybe 2 minutes to just kind of think about this. You don't have to have a clear answer right now. I just want you to start thinking about what are some problems that you see that you want to try to solve for. Right, I'm gonna move on. But the key thing I want you guys to think about is a lot of this ideation piece requires a lot of quiet time. So do know that I'm not giving a lot of time because I have a lot of content I want to quickly go over today. But a lot of it will require you to just really sit down, really meditate, and think about different problems that you want to solve for, things that you care about. In the last workshop I ran, I talked a bit about different meditations, but I didn't actually go into some of them. So Tim actually reminded me, so thanks for reminding me about that. So maybe I can quickly share some tips and tricks that I do in terms of helping myself collect my thoughts and think about new ideas and come up with different ways of solving problems. So there are a few different types of meditation techniques. I'm not a meditation expert myself. There are different formal names for it, so I'm not actually familiar with all of them. But there are some that I do that are quite common. So there's one I call focus meditation. So focus meditation is when I sit down, and I only really do this when I know that I have the solution somewhere in the back of my mind, but I just haven't had the time to really just sit down and really focus on it. So what I do then is I actually just find myself some quiet place or quiet time, and make sure that I don't have any distractions. And usually this really works best for me when I actually sit down and I don't get up until I have a solution. Like one example of me going through that is when I was forced to actually make a decision on what major I wanted to do in university. So I actually sat down, I actually meditated on a retreat, and I think it took me about 2 hours to decide what I want to do. And then in the most recent case would be meditating on how I want to pivot my business in the COVID situation and moving things online. So just sitting down, giving yourself some time to really focus on a problem when you feel like you kind of know that there is a solution on the cusp of your mind, but you haven't had the time to really just sit down and do that. Other types of meditation that I do to kind of just help me clear my thoughts. So one is, I call it present meditation. Basically what I try to do, and I don't know the formal term for it, is I just focus on being present in the moment. So focusing on my breathing, on the sensations. And the idea is present meditation is super easy. You can do it anywhere. You can do it on a bus. You can do it while you're taking a shower. But it's really about feeling everything. And it's not about focusing on like clearing your mind of thoughts. Like thoughts can come, they can go. Just you're just in the moment and you're just letting things flow. Another one is where you focus on one specific item. So that's more like a mantra. So sometimes people chant, they do a mantra. I like to do that when I am trying to fall asleep. So if I'm having too much thoughts, I want to clear my mind, then what I do is I really just focus on one thing. Like either I focus on my breathing or I focus on a chant, and then that really helps clear my mind and put me to sleep. So those are just some of the key different ways that I thought might be interesting for me to share with you guys as well. I'm sure there are many, many other different meditation techniques. If anyone knows some of them, then feel free to share that too. But assuming that now you have arrived at a stage where you kind of have a rough idea or you have some ideas, then the next step is how do you vet those ideas? How do you validate those ideas? So there is this framework known as root cause analysis, and it starts with the 5 whys. So it actually started with the Toyota manufacturing methodology. So the 5 whys methodology actually breaks down and helps you dig down onto the root cause of a problem. Because what commonly happens is sometimes when people think about problem solving, they stop at the first problem and they don't realize that that problem actually could be a symptom of an underlying problem. So for example, over here, why did the machine break down and overload blew the fuse? Why did that happen? That was because the bearing was not sufficiently lubricated. Why did that happen? Because the lubrication pump was faulty. Why? Because the shaft was worn and rattling. Why? Because a piece of scrap metal got in, right? So if you had stopped at the first place, all you would have done is, oh, fuse breaks down, I'm going to buy and replace a fuse. The idea is to challenge yourself and really ask why enough times to dig down into the root cause. And if you're solving root cause problems, that's where you typically come up with solutions where people will always come up and be like, oh, why didn't I think of that? So those are usually those like really, what was the word for it? Kind of like, oh, like the kind of problems. Like, I don't really know how to describe it, but the idea is sometimes it's 5 whys, sometimes it's more than 5 whys. Yeah, like an epiphany. So sometimes it's 5 whys, sometimes it's 3 whys, sometimes it's less, sometimes it's more. The idea is just to really challenge yourself. But when you're asking why personally, not only internally to challenge yourself, but you're asking your customers as well. Because sometimes what you think is the root cause might not be the root cause unless you actually speak to the customer and find out that they actually have something else behind that as well. So ask why both to yourself and to your customers. Great example, Uber, right? So if Travis had said, oh, I need a ride, I can't get a cab, and if he had stopped over there, he would have become a taxi driver. But of course, he didn't stop there. He actually asked why. There was no cabs around. Why? Because there is something wrong with the demand and service side. That's because there's a problem with the system itself, and that is really challenging the number of cabs and number of taxi drivers and where they're going to be. So he created Uber, or if you're in Asia, Grab is a kind of a parallel example. I talked about Foodie, so I can actually walk you through their pivot because they actually work quite closely with Spring. They were actually in our basement back in the early days. So in their case, when they started back in the days, like I mentioned, they were doing food delivery for consumers as well. Excuse me. So not dissimilar to DoorDash or back in the days, Just Eats. So there were many, many players. And what they were finding is that the market was quickly becoming quite saturated and consumers were not loyal. They would just go for the cheapest food delivery service out there. So they found that they were growing very quickly at the start, but they very quickly found that they were, plateauing out. They were, in the modern terms now, they were flattening their curve, right? So what they were doing is they would say, oh, okay, our curve is flattening. What should we do? How can we try to find different ways to actually try to get new business? So what happened was Larissa, who was one of their sales reps, was doing a bunch of cold calls to companies. And she was actually saying, hey, you know what, we do food delivery. Do you want us to cater for some of your upcoming events or meetings? And she happened to call an executive assistant, EA, and she actually said, oh, you know what, we do delivery for this company called Meat and Bread. And Meat and Bread is a local Vancouver sandwich restaurant. And what's interesting is Meat and Bread is so popular that when they started out, they actually did not do any delivery. And they didn't want to do it because they had a very obvious reason for it. Delivery is a distraction for them because when they're busy during lunch hour, they are packed and they're focused on serving customers that are in their store. They don't care about someone who comes in and wants to get delivery. So for them, they did not want to do delivery, but Larissa was able to convince them to do delivery for them. And when she called the EA, the executive assistant, and she said, hey, we do delivery for food or Meat and Bread, immediately that person was interested. So she knew that she was onto something. And by pivoting from consumer to business, they were actually able to create that win-win-win situation. So in the restaurant case, Meat and Bread was willing to do food delivery for foodie only because when foodie was doing food delivery, they would actually do large orders for meetings or events that were given at least 24 hours in advance. So what happened then is Meat and Bread would not actually be busy during lunch hours. They could actually spend their downtime, which is, let's say 3 p.m. to 5 p.m., when not as many people are coming into the establishment. They could spend that time preparing those large orders for the event the next day. So in their case, they were able to capitalize on their downtime, make more revenue for restaurants. But then for corporations as well, they were able to create a win situation because corporations now don't only get the regular boring food delivery for catering. It's not just the sandwich and the pizza anymore. And they now get interesting restaurants, different menus. And then for them, they were able to increase their average order size by quite a lot. Because if you think about it, average order size for consumers is about $30. Average order size for a company is at least $500 for bigger events. So for them, more money, more profit. For the restaurants, more profit as well. And then for the customers, the businesses, also better food as well. So they created that big, nice white space. So when you're thinking about different solutions, then really challenge yourself. Like, why is that a problem? Why are we getting saturated? Is there something else that's going on behind the scenes? Who else could we serve? What problems do they have? Just ask why enough times. So narrowing down your idea, I talked a bit about this in the last session last week. But if you weren't there, the idea is when we are evaluating ideas, we often evaluate based on pros and cons. So we often look at, hey, what are the risks involved in some of these ideas? What are some of the benefits? What are the rewards? And the challenge is pros and cons can be different for different people. So my pro might actually be your con. So the idea is if you really understand your core values, that helps you understand why they are a pro and con. So the example I give, and I won't go through in too much detail, but basically, if you have two choices, job A, job B, and job A is to work for a startup, high potential for reward, exciting opportunity, it's very risky. Job B is a corporate company, there's a stable income, there's a stable work schedule, 9 to 5, Monday to Friday. Which would you prefer? Different people would choose job A, different people would choose job B, right? So there are pros and cons for each, but each person's pros and cons might be different. And the idea is if you understand your values, it helps you inform those pros and cons. So for example, here, if John's personal values, family, health, security, and growth, you can imagine that he would probably go for job B, which is a corporate job, because he cares more about his family, about being able to spend time with them, about his health. So he having a regular schedule ensures that he can actually work out, go to the gym. Having the security as well speaks to that. So the idea is if you know your values, it's much easier for you to evaluate your ideas based on, are those ideas actually aligned with my values, or am I just going after opportunities? Because the entrepreneurs that I commonly see giving up on the ideas very quickly are the ones who think, hey, maybe I can make a lot of money from this. And then they actually quickly realize that, oh, actually it's a lot harder than I thought it's going to be. There are a lot more regulations to deal with, or I'm struggling to get customers. I can't make as much money as I think. And then they end up giving up very quickly. So I'm going to skip over this exercise because I've went through it before, but the idea is if you have not been in my last workshop, or if you've never actually reflected on your personal values, start with this. So quickly just take some time on your own when you have the free time. You can look at the slides if you want, but pick out a list of about 10 values that appeal to you. And this is just a sample over here. So you can come up with your own values. But the idea is start with 10 values. And then once you have the list of 10 values, you try to rank them from 1 to 10. And once you have that 1 to 10, you look at your top 3 values. And that's a great way to do it, because oftentimes a lot of people, if I ask you right now, like, what is your number 1 value? Or what's your top 3 values? It's really hard for you to condense into 3 things that you care the most about. But it's much easier to just talk about 10 things that you care about in general. And then from there, try to rank it or grade it. So more on the company side then, this is actually quite fun to do as an exercise if you have a team. So I've personally done it with a few teams, and it actually exposes a lot of very, very interesting things. So what you want to do is, if you have a team, sit down with your team, bring them together. Or if you're a solo founder, if you're planning on recruiting co-founders, if you're looking for developers, things like that, then you can do this with the co-founders that you plan on bringing on board as well. The idea is you want to do a reflection exercise with them. You want to get them to reflect and think about both what do they care about, what are their personal values, but also what they think the company values should be. What do they believe the company should behave or solve for? What values do they want to see in other employees? What values do they want to see their customers? Do they think they want the customers to see in them or in the company? And some very, very interesting stuff that will come up sometimes. Yes, Rafael, I will share the slides. Send me an email, I can send you the slides. But some interesting examples of things that come up from this exercise. I was working with this team once, and this CEO thought he was doing a great job with his team and managing the team. But one of the interesting things is when we did this exercise, a lot of his team members actually talked about how they actually couldn't have the ideas heard. So they had a lot of ideas, but it felt like they didn't have a way to express the ideas. So it was interesting for the CEO to just see the team members actually listing that down. So sometimes when you run it with a group, you can see things that you don't normally see because you are blindsided by it. So now that you have so we started with an idea and then we reflected on our values. So now if you know what values you have, it's probably a bit easier for you to narrow down your ideas. So now we kind of look at trying to sorry, my words are all mumbled right now. So now we're looking at how to crystallize the ideas and kind of narrow down to that one specific idea. So let's look at skills. So for example, I just got you to go through the exercise where you look at what you're good at, what you're not good at. So you can see, for example, over here, if there are 2 possible problems that you want to solve for, problem 1 is you think, oh, there are not enough vegan options for pizza. Problem 2 is cell phone contracts are too complicated. And you see that your skills over here, photography, tech savvy, product sales, marketing, wireless industry knowledge. It's probably going to be easier for you to solve for the second problem, right? So you're just looking for alignment, not only on values, but also on skills. But values here, I talked about that as well. So for example, here problems, if not, problem number 1 is there's no secure and trusted way to borrow money. Problem number 2, difficult for busy office workers to eat healthily. And you can see over here, your personal values are health, wealth, growth, love, freedom. Problem number 2 might be more appealing for you, right? So just kind of looking at your skills, looking at your values, and kind of matching them against the problems that you just came up with, and try to narrow down which is the best one to go after. So maybe I will quickly stop here, and then I want to go more into some common questions that I typically get. So we'll talk about how to differentiate from competitors. We'll talk about protecting your ideas, protecting your IP, things like that. But before we go into that, this is basically as far as we'll go for in terms of how to come up with ideas and ideation. Any questions on some of these stuff? All right, doesn't look like there's any questions, but again, feel free to type if I don't leave enough time. Oh, any recommendation of tools? Could you elaborate on tools? tools for ideation or tools for mapping out ideas? Is that what you're is that what you're referring to? Ideation. Personally, actually, someone mentioned hackathons back when we were waiting for people to join the group. I think hackathons are actually a great, not to say tool per se, but great medium for creating ideas and coming up with interesting things. So how hackathons typically work? Yes, business model canvas is one as well. So how hackathons work is typically you get together with a bunch of different people with different background, different experiences, different skills. And normally they typically run it as like a weekend long hackathon. Sometimes it's a 24-hour hackathon. So people will pitch their ideas. Sometimes they pitch complete ideas. They will actually say, hey, this is a solution I'm trying to build. Or sometimes they'll actually just pitch a problem. And then they say, who wants to solve this problem together? And then people will come together, they'll ideate together, and then they'll try to design a solution for it. Business model canvas is another great one. So business model canvas is more for mapping out the idea. So once you have the idea, you know kind of what the solution might be, then it's a great way to actually map out and look at who's the customer, what are the channels to go after, how you're going to make revenue, what are potential partners, what activities might you be doing, things like that as well. Samin, I'll talk about the donation piece at the end. So yeah, e-transfer definitely works. Great. Any other questions on ideation? What other tools are there? Design thinking is a great way for ideation as well. Doing ideation independently, yeah. So taking the design thinking framework and applying that, I think that works really, really well. So if you're not familiar with design thinking, the framework really emphasizes around empathy for the user, focusing on the user rather than just coming up with the idea on your own. So how design thinking typically works is you're going out, you're speaking to users or potential customers or people that you want to solve the problem for. And what you're trying to do is you're trying to really understand what their problem is intrinsically before jumping ahead and building a solution. So one of the methods that they use is they call it the double diamond methodology. So I quickly talked about that in the last session, but to elaborate, basically what that is it's two diamonds. In the left side of the diamond, the first phase, what you're doing is you're doing research. So you're going out, you're speaking to people, you're doing online research, and you're trying to figure out what are the problems that your customer has. So for example, if you say, okay, I want to build something for seniors. So you go out, you interview seniors, you find out that they have many, many different problems. Maybe they say, oh, you know what, I frequently fall and it's hard for me to get up, or right now it's difficult for me to get around because I don't have transportation, or it's difficult for me to eat healthily, things like that. So you end up at the end of research with a lot of different problems. And then the idea then is the next phase is consolidation. So all the different ideas that you have, is trying to identify which idea or sorry, which problem you really want to solve for. So the way to kind of identify is, again, go through this exercise where you're looking at your values, you're looking at skills, but you're also looking for patterns and commonalities between the different problems. So for example, if you might look at, let's say, seniors, for example, and in that case you say, oh, you know what, there are some problems that tend to gravitate around health. And there are some problems that tend to gravitate around, let's say, mental health, so more social isolation, things like that. And then there are other problems that really center around, let's say randomly, romantic relationships. So if you look at all these kind of problems, you might say, okay, you know what, maybe we want to solve for, let's say, romantic relationships. And if that's the case, then you have one specific problem now. So you're in the center of both the pyramids, both the diamonds. And okay, I want to solve this specific problem. Then the next phase then is you go out and ideate. So you try to come up for different ideas to solve, let's say, that specific problem, which is the romantic relationship piece. So you're trying to come up with different ideas. You might say, okay, we'll build an app for it. Maybe we'll do speed dating for seniors. Maybe we'll do a bunch of different stuff. So you come up with different ideas, and then you actually test and iterate. So that's the final phase, the last part of the diamond, where you're actually going out, launching your ideas, building what they call minimum viable products to actually test and see which form of the idea actually works best. So it's a bit hard to visualize now, but I can maybe quickly show you a visual just so you get a better idea of that. Let me get out the presentation. So you can see, yeah, first part, you're doing research, so you're diverging. You get a whole bunch of different problems, And then second phase, you're defining. So you're converging into one specific problem to solve. And then again, you ideate. So you come up with different ideas to solve that one specific problem. And then you converge again. So you're basically testing all the different ideas to see which one really works. So at the end, you end up with B, which is, you know exactly what you're building, who it's building it for, and how it's specifically designed as well. Hope that answers that. Great. Yeah, again, feel free to type up more questions as they come, but I'm going to move on. So ideation, coming up with differentiation points. One of the biggest things that I see with a lot of companies is they tend to try to jump onto the bandwagon when it comes to innovation. And they innovate for the sake of innovating, but they're not actually creating strong value. So some of the best examples would be like when blockchain came around and all the companies started saying, hey, how can we apply blockchain to our company? And you see it with AR and VR as well. They think, oh, how can we apply AR and VR to our company? So all these kind of things, like innovation is great, but you don't want to just be innovating for the sake of innovating. You want to actually make sure it actually increases value for your customers. I know we have some folks from Vietnam here in the call. When I was in Vietnam, actually, that was one of the biggest problems that I was seeing. Actually, a lot of companies talk about Industry 4.0. They talk about blockchain, AR and VR, but they really don't reflect on how it actually helps their customers, but they just do it for the sake of doing it. So I want to encourage that, if you want to innovate and differentiate, when you're thinking about value, you're thinking about how it's actually affecting your customers. So let's talk about how we can differentiate. So if you're thinking about going into a space where there are many other competitors in the space, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you need to know how to differentiate if you want to survive long term. So what I mean by that is, in the short term, execution is 100% what matters. I've seen a lot of entrepreneurs come up to me and say, hey, I have this idea, and they never follow up with me because they never actually execute on it. Oh, sorry, is the audio getting garbled? Is it better now? Or is it just me speaking too quickly? Is anyone else getting bad audio? You? Great. So yeah, I'm going to try and continue and see how it goes. Cool. So yeah, blue ocean strategy. So the idea here is you can go into a noisy marketplace, but you need to know how you're different. I was mentioning in the short term, execution is what matters. A lot of people come up with great ideas, but they don't go anywhere because they get into what I call analysis paralysis. They overplan, and when they overplan, they're afraid to take the first step. And often, like planning is important, but I think Mike Tyson said it, or was it someone else? You can plan as much as you can, but plans go out the window once you're punched in the face, right? So normally what happens is when you actually launch your product or service, your customers will actually respond to you, and you'll find that all your planning will actually go right out the window. So the act of planning itself is still valuable, though, because it really helps you consider all the different options and come up with a plan A, plan B, plan C. But don't overanalyze, because it will kind of hold you back. It will keep you paralyzed. So execution, number one first. You don't have to be different on day one, but you want to know how you're going to be different eventually if you do plan to capture a larger market size. So the blue ocean strategy, I kind of like the framework behind that. And if you're from Tamwood, I know some of the students are in here. Colin has probably talked about it a bit. But what I like to kind of just highlight on how to do it is how to actually apply the framework to analyzing your ideas as well. So the framework behind it is a lot of companies, when they launch, they do what we call compete in the rate C, the bloody rate C. So what you're doing there is you're basically trying to capture the same customers. You're trying to steal those customers away from your competitors. So normally what they would do is they compete on things like having a lower price, talking about having more value or giving more things to their customers. So that at the end of the day, you're not getting new customers. You're just competing in the same pie. The blue ocean strategy really focuses on getting you to make a larger pie instead of competing in the same pie. So the framework that they use is just 4 things: eliminate, reduce, raise, and create. And what's super interesting here is they talk about how you can differentiate based on that. So one example over here is Cirque du Soleil, which is the circus. When they were looking at the companies and competitors that were also doing circus performances, they found that all the other circuses out there tend to compete on the same things. So you'll notice that all the circuses, they always highlight, hey, we have the best performances, the best star athletes, the best acrobats, things like that. They have the most fanciest animal shows. They highlight, how exotic the animals are. They have a tiger, they have an elephant, things like that. And then they try to profit based on aisle concessions. And they really have low emphasis on price. So they try to price low so it's affordable for families. They try to focus more on fun and humor, thrill and danger. And when Cirque du Soleil launched, you can actually see they did the opposite of that. So they actually reduced an emphasis on star performers, on animal shows, on aisle concessions, and on the show arena itself. Reduced the emphasis on fun and humor and thrills and danger, but they actually created some new things. So they raised an emphasis on the venue, and they created theme and the focus on artistic music and dance. So what was interesting then is instead of competing for families, they were actually competing for people who were going out looking for, I kind of always say this the wrong way, but looking for adult entertainment, like people going out for Broadway shows, not the other kind of adult entertainment, but basically they're going out, they're looking for a good night, and they're looking for more intellectually stimulating kind of entertainment. So in that case, in Cirque du Soleil, they have a team. It's more artistic. It's more about, the music, the performance. So that's kind of how they angle it. And they were able to increase their price a lot because now they're not catering to its families. So they're actually creating a larger pie instead of competing in the same pie. Make sense? Another great example that they give is Yellowtail. So Yellowtail, the wine out of Australia, when they started, they were going into a very, very competitive marketplace as well. A lot of other winemakers out there, right? So you have premium wines which compete on the same things, and then you have budget wines that compete on the same things as well. So premium wines, they all focus around, the prestige of the vineyard, the reputation, and they always focus on complex flavors. They talk about, different jargon. The way they describe the flavoring is all very sophisticated, right? And then if you look at budget wines, they also compete on the same things. They focus a lot on, the aging quality, the price. So what they were doing is they said, okay, how can we try to be a bit different? So in their case, they created elements where it's focused on ease of selection, fun and adventure, easy drinking. They were actually trying to capture a different market. So they said, hey, instead of capturing or trying to go after existing wine drinkers, why don't we try to create wine where people who drink beer and cocktails will actually want to drink this wine? And when they went out and did discovery, they found out a lot of people who chose to drink cocktails or chose to drink beer actually didn't want to drink wine because they found that wine drinkers were very snobbish. They were always like, hey, we know everything about the flavoring and we know all these fancy terms and stuff like that. So they said, hey, why don't we make wine that's super simple, easy to enjoy, and it's really focused more around those fruity flavors, right? So that's kind of how they actually created a new customer base and went after a sort of different market. So if you're thinking of solving for a problem, again, like there are so many ideas out there, so many markets. Great example here is, let's say car dealership. You turn on the radio, you hear an ad for a car dealership, they all sound exactly the same. They always talk about 0 interest down. So how can you actually be different? What are they all competing on? Map that out and then think about, are those elements relevant for you? What can you create that is not currently being competed on? What can you reduce in terms of emphasis for those existing elements? What can you maybe raise? What can you focus on? So, raise, eliminate, reduce, and create. So when it comes to, so that just helps you with thinking about how to differentiate, but it doesn't actually give you very specific defensible points. So what I normally say to a lot of entrepreneurs is, if you are worried about competitors stealing your customers, number one is competitors will steal your customers. So like it or not, the idea is if you're doing a good job, you're doing a great product, people will want to steal your idea, and that's fine. Don't get too caught up about people copying your idea. If you're really passionate about the problem, about solving the problem for the customer, you will actually welcome competitors, because the idea is if you're, so let's say in my case, for example, is I'm passionate about helping people with developing soft skills. So if someone wants to help other people develop soft skills, even if they're competing with me, I welcome that. Because at the end of the day, it's creating a lot more informed people, people who are more passionate about what they're doing and know how to actually execute better. So number one is don't see competitors as a bad thing. Again, number two, competitors are educating your customers as well. So you can piggyback off that. But as competitors come into your marketplace, you still want to be able to defend yourself. So what you can do is focus, number one is focus on your brand. So we talked about the values piece quite a bit in the start. If you have a strong brand, that is a lot harder to steal. They can steal your product design. So let's say if you have a physical product, that's even easier to steal. Or if you have, let's say, if you created a course, people can steal that as well. But if you have a strong brand, customers will be loyal to your brand. So I remember like Lululemon, for example. Oh, no, sorry. What was it? Under Armour. There's like I saw recently there's like a Chinese knockoff for Under Armour as well. But at the end of the day, people still buy from Under Armour because they recognize the brand and they find that the quality is there if they go after the actual brand rather than the counterfeit. Excuse me. So people will still go for the brand because of the quality, right? So if you build a strong brand, that's harder to steal. Number two is if you can build a community, go for that. Communities are great because communities are very tight-knit. So once you have a strong community, people are tied to the relationship with the other people in the community. So if you have a competitor coming in, even if they have a better reputation, sometimes people are not willing to move because they already know everyone else in this existing community. Number three is how can you integrate? So integrate as much as you can, try to get everything else tied into your product or solution. So I see a lot of software companies doing this. CRMs are a great example. So let's say HubSpot or Salesforce. You'll know that once you set it up, you'll have to integrate your inbox to it. You have to integrate maybe even your, if you have a different mail client like MailChimp or ActiveCampaign, you might integrate with it or you might even move to it. So the more you integrate with whatever product or service, the harder it is for you to switch. Like if people have already set up their payrolls on your system, if they've already set up their credit cards on your system, then they're going to find it more difficult to actually move away from your system, right? So the more you can integrate, the harder it is for them to switch. So those are three quick tips in terms of how to kind of build a moat and defend yourself from competitors. But really at the end of the day is, what idea really excites you? Excuse me. So yeah, focus on ideas that excite you and kind of start from there. But quickly, so here I talked about this in the last session as well. At the end of the day, like when you are thinking about ideas, you're trying to find that ikigai. You're trying to find what is the core. What do you love that aligns with what you're good at and what you can be paid for and what the world needs? So that is kind of the sweet spot to be in. So hopefully, if you're thinking about starting an idea, if you're thinking about starting a company, you're actually working on something that really aligns with everything. You're not just doing something because you want to make a lot of money out of it. Sure, it can work, but very quickly you'll find that you're not that passionate about it. Maybe I'm going to zoom out. I said I was going to talk about protecting your ideas. Oh, I do have it later. So maybe I'll quickly talk about creativity. So on a high level, there are 4 key types of creativity. So there is, the 4 quadrants is cognitive, knowledge-based, and emotional versus deliberative, conscious, and spontaneous. So what that is if you look at cognitive and deliberate, those are what we call kind of like those light bulb moments. It requires that you actually know a lot about the subject. So you need to have a lot of knowledge and you need to really think about it a lot. You need a lot of time to consciously come up with a solution. Emotional ones are where you actually need to consciously think about something, but you actually need to have that quiet time for ideas to just come up as well. So kind of those aha moments. So that's the top right. Spontaneous ones, those are instances where sometimes, like I don't know if you've had those situations where some of the best ideas always come to me when I'm in the shower or when I'm on the loo or on the toilet bowl. So typically that happens when you're actually stopping your conscious mind and not actually actively working on the problem, and it tends to come up naturally. So in psychology, they actually talk about how the brain will consolidate different ideas when when your brain is not actively working on a problem. So what happens is you need to actually give yourself some time to take a break and actually come off from the idea for a bit, and that will sometimes spark some of those kind of epiphanies, right? And then more emotional and spontaneous, like just really coming up with something brand new, like the artists, the musicians. The idea to really encourage that is you need to get into the rhythm of breaking your habits. So if you find that you're frequently taking the same route to work, or you probably notice that every day you go to work, you might find like you're on an autopilot. Like sometimes I drive to work and I realize that, oh, I'm here at work. I didn't even realize what happened. And that's really because we start to build very specific habits once we get into a rhythm of doing things. And the idea is, how can we break that? The more we break it, the more we actually force ourselves to be a bit more creative as well. So challenge yourself, try to make yourself uncomfortable, come up with new ways to do things. So the idea is you want to explore and experiment in different ideas. The more different experiences, again, I mentioned diversity in opinions, diversity in perspectives. The more you see different ways of doing things, the more ideas can come up. You also want to try to build what we call a liquid network. So the idea here is you're trying to find and connect with different people all the time. You sometimes just need to give some patience. Ideas take some time to develop as well. So make sure that you take some breaks, come off the ideas. Don't focus so much on coming up with an idea in a single moment. And it's okay to make mistakes, right? Sometimes your ideas will improve over time. Think about new ways to use old inventions, build on ideas that have come before. So you don't necessarily have to come up with something brand new that no one else is doing as well. Problems can't be solved with the same mindset that create them. So get to know other people, get to go out of the box, come up with different solutions, different perspectives. So that's kind of the takeaway over here. So should I share my idea? This is a big one that I frequently get. A lot of entrepreneurs say, hey, I have this great idea, but I don't know if I should talk to you about it. Maybe I should get you to sign an NDA. And what I normally say is stealth is for S for stealth, is also for stupid. So what you want to do is NDAs, if you're not familiar with it, it's called a non-disclosure agreement. Basically, it's a document that you sign so that people won't share whatever you're saying to them with anyone else. And what I typically say is you shouldn't get anyone to sign an NDA if you're going to share your idea with them, with a caveat. So when you share your idea with people, generally you're sharing a very high level version of your idea. You're talking about what you're doing. You're not getting into the how. You're not getting into the technical details. If you are getting into the technical details, then the next thing to consider is who are you sharing with. So if you're sharing with a consultant or an investor, you should never get them to sign an NDAs. It's a big turnoff. No investor or no consultant will care about you if you're asking them to sign an NDA. So if you're sharing with a potential competitor, then it might be okay to get them to sign an NDA. Or if you're actually getting to a point where you're hiring a developer or maybe a potential CTO or co-founder, and you say, hey, you know what? Let me actually show you how I plan on making this work. Then you might go to an NDA. So if you're getting into that level of detail, then sure, you can use an NDA. But otherwise, don't worry about NDAs. Don't worry about being first in the market. At the end of the day, the more you share, the better it is, because your ideas will actually evolve over time as you share. So you can get feedback more quickly. It's really difficult to find help or find teammates if you're not willing to share your idea as well. So I'd say just go out there, share your ideas. Don't be worried about people kind of stealing it. Maybe any questions on this before I jump? No questions? Great. I'm just going to wrap up because I think we're kind of at the end as well. But yeah, receive feedback, build your network, forces you to commit to the idea. That's one of the big things. Once you share, once you get the word out, people will know that you're doing it, and you will also find that you're more committed to it as well as the more people know about it. And it helps you build your thought leadership as well. If you don't share, then people won't see you as an expert. The more you share, the more you have an opinion on something, the more they feel you're an expert on it as well. So Next steps, come up with your idea, think about which idea is best, really reflect, is it a problem or is it a symptom? And really reflect, are you actually excited about it? And once you know what you're working on, you can start to build a roadmap to actually make it a reality. So that's that. That's it for the presentation. I'll have some Q&A at the end. But very quickly, what's coming up and what's next? Next week, we actually have a panel session on entrepreneurship as a career option. So we have a few people. We have Tiffany from Spring. She's a program manager. She is also a food entrepreneur. She ran a food business for a few years. We have Colby Harder, who runs Conti Electrics. Basically, they are audiovisual technical company, and he's been running the company for more than, I think, 15 years. So a very, very established entrepreneur. And we also have Isaac and Karen, who are running a brand new company, Milton Spark. So I think what's interesting there is I'm trying to put together a panel with entrepreneurs from different backgrounds, different seniorities as well, to give you a different perspective on, the good, bad, and ugly of entrepreneurship. So I want to expose you on not only all the rosy stuff, but also what are really some of the risks involved in considering entrepreneurship as a career. So I think it's going to be an interesting session, especially if you've recently been laid off, or maybe you're just thinking like, should I go into entrepreneurship? Should I start my own company? So that's a session to join. And then we have a few other sessions coming up. So I won't go through all of them, but you can visit them on the website. I'm going to quickly copy the link just so you get that. And I'll put it in chat. I will send it out in an email as well if you're interested in the upcoming workshops. I quickly mentioned with the tipping, I try to call it tip because I'll be honest, like this donation is not going to go to some sort of charity. It's primarily for myself to just sustain me and my family. So if you want to tip, feel free to tip by sending an e-transfer to my email, chin@classynowl.com. And my ask is pay whatever you think is fair value. So if you feel like you get good value out of this, it's all up to you. Again, it's a free session. It's just all up to your choice. You pay what you feel is worth. Feedback welcome. So if you have any suggestions on how I can improve the sessions as well, feel free to chime in. I'm going to quickly share this in the chat as well. Oh, there we go. So yeah, that's a feedback form. If you find that I was probably going through this presentation a bit too quickly. This was actually a lot of content. But yeah, anything else that you observe, like the way I speak or too many filler words or something I said that made you uncomfortable, feel free to share that in the feedback. And that's basically it. Questions? Not a problem, Carmen. If you have no questions, and if you don't really want to hang around for some of the other questions to see any responses, then you can feel free to log off. But if you want to hang around, I'll stay around for about 5 minutes more. All right, see you all. For those that are hitting up, stay safe and healthy. Name of the ideation chart. I think that was the double diamond that you're looking at for design thinking. The design school is Red Academy. Red Academy. Great. Any other questions? How can you connect with Red Academy students? Great question. Let me pull up the email. And Sure. Sarah at Red Academy would be the best one to contact. And you can reach her if before Friday. She will still be checking this email. Oops. I sent to the wrong person. Give me a second. That is. So that's her email, Sarah Makura at Red Academy, or she has a Gmail as well. Sure. Thomas, I will hang around. Do you want it to be a private chat, or are you open to talking with some of the few people on here? I'll quickly address Eric's question first, and then you can go. What are some ways of speeding up testing iterations of execution of your idea in its infancy? Great question. So there's a lot of talk about lean methodology and using minimum viable products to kind of design different things. What I typically find is, sorry, give me a second. I'm going to mute someone in the background. Oh, that's Thomas. I'm going to mute you for a second. So Eric, I was talking about lean methodology and MVPs, minimum viable products. But what I typically find is a lot of people don't do it the right way. So if you're looking to test an idea, typically what I like to do as a first step is to actually list out some of the assumptions that I want to test. So what I will normally do is I will typically start with a tool like a business model canvas. And from there, I'll map out some of the different pieces, like who I think the customers might be, what I think the value proposition might be, how I think it might be making money, what are some activities, things like that. So once you map out your business on a business model canvas, what you will notice is some of the things are facts, some of them are assumptions. So for example, a fact might be, we will target millennials. Millennials are, this demographic, so that's a fact. But the act of targeting millennials, like that's an assumption. You're assuming that millennials are your ideal target customer. So that's one of the things that you might want to validate, right? So when you're testing, you start by actually identifying the assumptions. Once you know what assumptions are, then you just want to make sure that the experiments that you create actually help you validate those assumptions. The common problem I see is a lot of minimum viable products that are created, they don't actually help with validating those assumptions. They are just like what they think is a minimum like prototype. It's like a mock-up, but it doesn't actually give them any useful information. Or they go out and they do customer discovery and they don't ask the right questions. They don't actually validate those assumptions. They ask things like, how much are you making as an average salary? Because they think it might be important for pricing, but it doesn't actually help them validate the right assumption. So make sure you know your assumptions first, and then you design your questions or your sort of prototypes to actually test those assumptions. I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Thomas, you had a question?
Yeah. So can you hear me?
Yep.
Good. So hi, I'm Thomas from Mad Ventures. Mad Ventures is actually the oldest venture capital firm for Victoria.
Oh, great.
We've been around 18 years. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to change this game of venture capital.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's something that we can probably work together on. What we do is we give money, training, mentorship, all the resources that anyone who wants to learn the black art of venture capital need to get started. And we empower them to find deals, and the kicker is we share any profit that's created 50-50 with our new partners that come in.
Yeah, I'm open to exploring. I think I might have seen you at one of the Karatsu Forum events before. If you
great.
attend those.
Yeah.
And I'm assuming that because you are in the VC space, that you really only focus on typically tech companies, more venture scale, more late stage, right? Series A and above.
Not late stage. Our typical sweet spot is around 2 million pre-money valuation. and it doesn't, you know, we invest fairly early. Our check size is not that large though. We typically invest somewhere between 25K to 100K. We currently have close to 100 portfolio companies that we funded. And we currently just recently welcomed our 14th investment partner to the firm.
Yeah, I'm definitely open to exploring. So definitely
Sure.
send me a message. Yeah.
So I'll send you my email address, ping me, and then we'll continue this conversation offline.
Sure thing. Thanks for reaching out.
Excellent. Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
The VC name is called Mad Ventures. Mad as in crazy, mad.
Yep.
The MAD in Mad Ventures actually stand for milk and diapers. There's a lot of similarities between raising a child and raising a tech firm. They both need a lot of milk, also known as money, and they need their shit. They need their shit taken care of. So that's what we provide: milk and diapers.
That's a great name.
Thank you. All right. Well, thank you.
Yeah, not a problem.
I'll
send you a message.
You bet. Okay. Sure. Thanks, everybody.
All right. See you.
See ya.
Great. All right. Anyone else? Anything else? If not, I will be ending the session in a few minutes. All right, thank you all. I think I'll be ending the session. Have a good night and stay safe, social distancing or physical distancing. All right, have a good night.